our theme of celebrating Arkansas, today we're going to celebrate some Arkansas history. And also in keeping with our theme of CBC Day here at Rotary, we are going to introduce a special speaker to you here in just a minute, Dr. Melvin Dusty Bender. Let me tell you a little bit about him. I asked him to send me some bio information, so he sent me his abbreviated bio, and it's only 3 pages long. So I'm going to try to condense that a little bit. You guys want to hear from him, I know. Dr. Bender did his postmaster's studies at University of Arkansas. I jumped ahead. He got his master's from the University of Central Arkansas, his bachelor's as well, and he got his PhD in history from the University of Memphis. He's done quite a few things in his lifetime. He was a non-commissioned officer training official in the U.S. Army. At CBC, he was started as a practical Christian ministries director, and that was in 1980. He's been there ever since. And today he serves as the social studies department chair at Central Baptist College and as a professor there. As far as his teaching experience goes, he's a professor of history. He's taught All-American and World History and other social science courses. He also has been an adjunct professor at the University of Central Arkansas. Page 2. His professional work summary is so involved, I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights for you. He's a program review specialist at the Arkansas Department of Education, an advisor and contributor to the Arkansas Department of Education. He organized and implemented a comprehensive Christian service ministry program for Central Baptist College, initiated a baccalaureate degree in history at CBC, initiated a baccalaureate degree in Christian counseling at CBC, served on numerous accreditation committees, and so on, and so on, and so on. Professional memberships, he's a member of the Arkansas Association for College History Teachers. He's a member of the Arkansas Historical Society. He's past president of the Faulkner County Historical Society and has had several positions with the Association of Christian Service Personnel. And then we go through a list of publications and presentations. Again, I'm just going to try to hit the high points here. But there have been a lot of them, including he contributed to the Encyclopedia of Arkansas History and Culture, including a presentation at the Arkansas Historical Quarterly's annual meeting. He wrote a quarterly column for the Christian Service Personnel Departments of colleges, accredited by the American Association of Bible Colleges, and on and on and on. But now I want to get to the fun part. This is about his family. He married Paula Elizabeth Haney in May of 1975. He says he's still happily married after all these years. And they have 6 wonderful children, and I like the way he puts this. They have 2 that are homegrown and 4 from the farmer's market. And what he means is 2 of his biological kids, but he and his wife have adopted 4 special needs children and have seen them through. They're all practically adults now. It says he has 2 delightful grandchildren who are the light of his life. He attends Antioch Baptist Church, serves as a co-teacher there, part of a Sunday night small group ministry, served as member, editor, and past president of the Faulkner County Historical Society, and a past member, past member of the Conway Noon Lions Club. And currently he is a member of the Family History Board at Jonesboro Human Development Center. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Dusty Bender. If you make him feel welcome, I would appreciate it.
Well, with my colleagues and co-workers out there, I feel like I'm standing before the Inquisition, okay? And one of you kind of needs to give me the head up when it's about time to quit. When Rick contacted me, he gave me a pretty significant challenge. He said, you need to speak about something in Arkansas history, and there are a few things that we can talk about there. Preferably something local and interesting. Interesting is like beauty, it's in the eyes of the beholder. I mean, it may be interesting to me, it may not be interesting at all to you. And 30 minutes tops. I looked at some instructor course evaluations just the other day, and I was kind of amused by one of those responses. And it said, this guy can drag out a PowerPoint longer than any human being I know. So 30 minutes may not work. Okay? Now, When I teach Arkansas history, I teach a lot of different history courses, but when I teach Arkansas history, it's kind of an unusual phenomenon. Students come in there, and this did happen a couple of years ago. One student came in and said, you know, I've taken Arkansas history in the 5th grade. I've taken Arkansas history in junior high. I've taken Arkansas history in high school. And you ain't going to learn me nothing new. And I thought to myself, you're probably right. And then the other typical response is, what? Arkansas history? We do have some, okay? We do have some. And some of it is pretty interesting, some of it is pretty intriguing, some of it's very questionable. We just have to pick and choose. Now, I'm going to tell you some of the things that I thought about covering, but I'm not going to. And some of those are pretty interesting things, like the Zerby Air Sedan. It was built in 1918 as a new kind of flying machine, and we often refer to that as the Fayetteville Flop. Didn't really do very well at all. When we went on that test run with that first thing, the builder, Jerome Zerby, said it flew about 40, 50 feet in the air, made it about 1,000 feet. Some of the bystanders said maybe 40 inches above the ground and not quite 1,000 feet, so you're not really going to qualify that as a success. We can look at the second monkey trial. Norman Geisler, who was, I believe, at the Dallas Theological Seminary back in 1981, referred to this as the second day in America's history that would live in infamy. And it dealt with Frank White's Act 520, which offered up the equal treatment law here in Arkansas. So if you're going to teach evolution, you've got to teach creation. And there's a tremendous dynamic behind that particular story. And it's the beginning of the downfall of Steve Clark. We can play ball, America's national pastime. If you've watched very much television at all, some of the news channels, you discover that there's a brand new documentary out. It's entitled The Boys of Spring. And they're tapping into really an uncharted area, looking at Major League Baseball training camps here in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And that's kind of exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing that movie. But we can also look at the Negro Baseball League. Very, very strong in the state of Arkansas. We have things like the Claiborne Tigers. We see great athletes coming out of Arkansas, Dizzy and Daffy Dean. Sockless Joe. And some of you know he may not be as famous as he is infamous, but we have a lot going on there. We can talk about the Mercy Train boxcar that came to Arkansas from France. We sent a bunch of food there during the tail end of World War II to keep them from starving, and they reciprocated by sending 49 boxcars of gifts to the United States. And one of those boxcars went to every single state in the Union, and then Hawaii, which was a territory in Washington, D.C., split a boxcar. But they had about 700 gifts. I'm not sure who got all of those gifts. But that's kind of an interesting thing. We can talk about Halloween. We've got the Wild Man of the Ozarks. Hey, listen, I live in Valonia. We had an honest-to-goodness Bigfoot convention this past year. And no taunters were allowed. So now at night, when my dogs fire off at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I expect it to be a coyote running across the front yard, but maybe Sasquatch. Going out there with my cell phone, and I'm going to make history. I'm going to be the first one to really get a bona fide picture of this sucker. But you know what? Valonia-Faulkner County has some of the highest reported incidents of Bigfoot sightings in the state of Arkansas, so that's pretty cool, man. We can look at Arkansas's bankruptcies, 3 of them. 1841, 1884. I like the 1884 one because they kind of divided the debts of Arkansas into just and unjust debts. We're going to cancel out the unjust debt. I've got one of those with Wells Fargo. They're charging me too much money interest on the mortgage, so let's cancel that one out and see how that works. But then we canceled it out in the 1830s as well. Education close to home. You know about colleges here. We had one in Valonia, where the pizza place is. That was the classroom, and then you went through the tunnel under the highway over to where the old museum used to be. And that's where the dormitories were for the Arkansas Holiness College. Got in 1904 and closed doors somewhere around 1931. And then we can look at our Ferguson, Missouri. Had three reputable or notable ones. One that took place at El Dorado, Arkansas in 1910. Another one that took place in Elaine, Arkansas. And then one that took place in Earl, Arkansas in 1970. So a lot of things that we can talk about, but we're not going to. 30 minutes, Arkansas Razorbacks, no way. So what I'm going to focus on is a topic that is not really well known. Focuses on the Amish in Arkansas. Read the Log Cabin Democrat every week. Lavina or Gloria comes to us in the Amish cookbook. And you know what? She has got a following in this state that's like second to none. I mean, she's almost goddess-like. Because, man, even in my home, I mean, we get up early and go 893 feet down the driveway to get to Log Cabin Democrat on Friday, come home. Before we even do my quiet time, I read about what Gloria is doing, you know. And I grew up with family members that lived not very far at all from Amish communities, both in Pennsylvania and in Iowa. So it's something that I'm interested in, and something that has touched base in Arkansas over the 20th century. We had 5 major Amish starts in our state. Stuttgart somewhere around 1927. A handful of families moved there, and when the first state bank of Stuttgart went belly up in 1932, they bailed, they left, they lost all of their money, and they cut out. One of those families, by the way, went up to Nettleton, that's not too far from Jonesboro, started a settlement up there hoping to bring people in, but it only lasted 2 years because they could only bring one other family in. And I mean, you're not going to have a community with just 2 families. So that one's not going to work very well at all. We go into Searcy County, St. Joe, from the early 1950s all the way to the late 1960s. And there are still a couple of old order Mennonite families that still live in the St. Joe area even today, but I mean, that colony is not really going to survive. We have one out here in Bologna. The first wave of migrants came in 1959 and they left by 1965. I put that in CBC Blue because that was probably the most successful of all of those Amish starts here at home. And then when that one went belly up, they left and they went back home. And then in 1975, one of those families that was at Bologna came back to the Gray, started another colony there, and it kind of thrived for a while until they had some kind of sexual activities going on there between one lady in the Amish family and somebody else in the community, and that kind of blew it all apart. And they all went back home. She left her husband, and she just stayed where she was at. So we've got some activity going on in this area, and we might need to ask, why did they come here? Bologna, Arkansas in particular. Real estate company in Conway, the United Real Estate Company of Conway, began to put out some land brochures. In those magazines, you know, that they send out everywhere, and they went up into places like Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, Illinois, even Missouri. And they began to talk about cheap but good farmland. In 1959, I've got a couple of statistics for you. Let me read them so I give them to you right. Hate to lie when I'm teaching, okay? 1959, the average price of an acre of land in America was $97 an acre. And in Arkansas, it was $91, $6 less than the average. But if you were living in Iowa, where most of these Amish came from, it's $221 an acre. And they're looking out to try to establish homesteads for their kids and future generations, and at $221 an acre as opposed to $91 an acre, I can understand why they moved. In 1965, when they left, 1964 stats said it's about $138 an acre on the national average, and $142 in Arkansas, and $310 in Iowa. So the land was a big draw. Frederick Jackson Turner, the great American historian, talked about free and cheap land in the West. Going to pull us out there. Well, it grew Amish to Arkansas as well. Low taxes, favorable climate, conservative people, all of those things were exciting and enticing to the folks that wanted to move. Now let's talk about those people that moved. We had a total of 11 families that moved into the Valonia area. Now, if you want to kind of put this in context, if you head on out toward Valonia, you take the bypass, you see South Coker Road, South Church Road, hang a right, and we've got a couple of farms out there. If you go out to Highway 5, you head on toward Little Rock, hang a left on 319, and then just come north of 319. There's some farmland there. That's kind of where they settled, relatively close to one another, within walking distance, horse and buggy distance. But they brought those families in there. They were all related. Extended family, extended clan, except for 2 bachelors that they imported as well, because these families had a couple of daughters that were reaching marrying age. And you don't want to marry your first cousin. That is not something cool, even in the Amish community. So we needed to have some other folks that were eligible marriage partners in that community. On the first month of their settlement in Arkansas, a major tragedy impacted them. Tooling down Highway 64 in a horse and buggy, and a pickup truck tried to park itself in that horse and buggy. Major wreck. And several of the Amish were seriously injured. Nobody died. But one of the families, her family, said, we kind of take this as an omen that maybe we shouldn't be here. But it's still going to take them a few years to decide for sure that they don't need to be there. Well, in Valonia, they are a curiosity. Something that we haven't seen much of before. But we received them well, even though we're kind of standoffish just a little bit. We just don't know how or what we're going to do with this kind of people. Their appearance was different. They're more Mennonite than they are Old Order Amish, because they would have full facial hair, mustaches, not just a little tweaky long goatee, And they dressed a little bit more primitively. Sort of, if you would kind of roll the calendar back into the latter part of the 19th century, and you'll see a picture which is very, 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 very rare, because most Amish people don't pose for portraits, okay? Some of them do selfies now. They take a picture of themselves and preserve it forever, but they don't sit down for a family portrait. They focused on the family, skipping over a couple of these things, okay? I do that in class too, so it's okay. You're just going to be tested on everything, but not just what I speak about. Focused on the family. So James Dobson may have borrowed that phrase from them, because you see it appearing a lot in their literature. And then in Valonia, they were a little bit terrified because they had this domineering figure, the bishop of that community, a guy by the name of Bortlinger. And every time people would go to talk to somebody in that Amish world, you might go over to this house here off of South Church Road, and the bishop is living off of 319, but the bishop shows up out there. It's almost like magic. Wherever anybody's talking to the Amish, the guy shows up. And that kind of intimidated the population just a little bit. Why don't you let them speak for themselves? Instead of you becoming the spokesman, the de facto spokesman for that entire group out there. Now this is one of the homes that existed out there, and it was still in extreme disrepair until the last tornado came through and helped it be erased from the landscape. And this was a home that the Wayne Yoder family bought. And it had modern conveniences in it, electricity, running water. Y'all like those? They did not use the electricity, and they dug a well and they drew the water out of the ground. It's their way of life. To me, that would be stupid. Just use what you got. You buy into it, let it go. But this is one of those rare occasions, and you'll see a more close-up portrait of that family as well. And the reason we have these portraits is part of this family went on and did some genealogical study and some historical investigation of their past background, and they decided that this might be a good thing to include in a book that they self-published. So we get a couple of pictures of this particular family out of Arkansas. Now let's talk about their way of life for just a minute. They were met with some degree of maybe skepticism because they're just different. You ever feel uncomfortable when you're around somebody that's not like you? Sure we do. You check out a Walmart and there might be a Hispanic family in front of you checking out, and they're just talking away and you don't understand a whole lot of Spanish, and they turn around and look at you and all of a sudden they laugh. You think, man, I never looked at that. You know, you think it's you because we don't understand. And a lot of those community members attempted to work their way into that Amish community so that they would understand them. But in a lot of ways, the Amish community closed its doors. I mean, they may not have wanted to be understood. So, what do we know about their life? Now, the Arkansas Amish are not any different from the Amish anywhere else. They focus on their family, their extended family, so it's not unusual for an entire family, mom, dad, 6 to 12 kids, their siblings, their kids, to all move when they went and relocated somewhere else. Tremendously interdependent. It's going to be one of the reasons the Bologna community crashes. You can't bring new blood in. How will you survive? Because we become self-sufficient. We depend on what we do. They disdain modern conveniences. Now that doesn't mean in certain instances they don't use those. I have one record of a person having an appendicitis attack, and they had to get to the hospital, and they're out in Bologna, and they can jump on Hi-Ho Silver and let him pull the wagon and run into town, or they can run over to their neighbors and say, listen, would you run me into town? Because I think Michael Hare is dying. So, I mean, it's a matter of life and death. We might turn the faucet on and use the water, or take a ride in a car, or hire a taxi to get us where we need to go. But they don't like those things because they think they are a threat to the modern family. Y'all have one of these? This is a convenience. It's technology. This is, and I'm going to preach here, Rotary, you may not like me, you may fire me after this, but these are a threat to the American family. We sit down and we text somebody at the other end of the dinner table because we can't talk to them. But they rejected all of that to bring the family together and to keep it tight and to make it work. We need to applaud them on that. They sent their kids to school. But, oh, there were some strict rules. But the kids were mischievous. They did things that they weren't supposed to do. Listen to me. One of those little girls got in trouble because that bun of her hair up here, she took it down so everybody could see how long it was. And she was nailed by her parents. That's like sticking gum under the table when I went to school. That was a major infraction. We laugh about stuff like that. Well, they didn't participate in extracurricular activities. They went to school, they learned. Their studies and all of their educational background was monitored by their parents because the parents wanted to shield them from the bad stuff that was out there that might corrupt them. So they didn't participate in extracurricular sports. If they had holidays, they didn't participate for the most part in those holidays. When we would have gift exchanges at Christmas, you know, you can count on them not bringing one, but the teacher would always give the little Amish kid something. And if they hauled it home, most of the time their parents would let them keep that. But even in school, as they tried to interact with one another, they were kind of aloof, they were standoffish, they were by themselves, which just added a little bit more suspense and perhaps some suspicion to who they were. They liked church. some of us go to church. I had grandkids over to the house the other day, and don't you tell my daughter and son-in-law I ratted out on one of their kids, you know. And one of them looked at me and said, "Do you have to go to church all the time?" Yeah, you know, we're demon-possessed as it is, we need you fixed. That's the reason we're sending you there. You know? They went to church in people's homes. They didn't have a church building. Now, the Amish community in McRae, the last start that we had shown you on that earlier slide, they did. They built a church, they built a school. But we didn't have any of those conveniences here in Columbus. So we would go from house to house to house. And every house would have a big barn, or they would have an outbuilding, they would have a gathering place, and you'll see a couple of examples of those here in just a minute as well. And that's where they would have church. They were as serious as they could be. You ever go to church and cut up? Joke with somebody? Man, if you were Amish and you did that, people would be stepping back because lightning bolts would certainly fly. I mean, it was serious business. They would start with singing hymns from a hymn book that was originally published in 1793. And no worship choruses. No modern hymns. There were 51 hymns. There still are 51 hymns in this hymn book. And they are stories and narratives about trials of the martyrs of the faith. And they are generally sung for 30 to 45 minutes. That's how long one of these hymns is. So they would sing 3 hymns, and then the bishop would get up and preach for another hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. And then your stomach is growling, so you can hardly wait for the fellowship time to come along, you know, and you can eat. And that was just as sacred to them as anything else. Because even though they lived in the same community, the truth of the matter is they may not get together very often at all. So church was big. Church, to me, to my family, was big. Told you where they met in these barns. When the Yoder family left Independence, Iowa, this was what they left. Now, they never sold their property. Maybe they had some premonition that it's just not going to work out. They didn't sell it. They allowed some family members to farm it. But they would have their meetings in this barn. When they moved to Arkansas, this was where they had their church. Wasn't a whole lot. But it was like everybody else had as well. And it looked kind of rough on the outside, but I suspect if you would go inside, it would be cleaned up, it would look nice, it would be tidy, it would be a welcoming place. Because you're going to spend a lot of time there. So that's how they would meet, that's how they would worship. Well, they leave, but there's some kind of handwriting on the wall, I think, that signaled the fact that they would not be staying around Bologna very long. For instance, things like disappointing crop harvests. If you're a farmer, and they're mainly farmers, you've got to be able to make enough from your produce to pay your bills, to take care of everything else that you need to take care of. And they've got mortgages just like we did, and they're paying taxes just like we are, and they're having to hire some of these other conveniences that we are enslaved to, like cars and cell phones and things of that nature. Because their farming didn't pan out, they often had to go outside of their community to work. So they hired out as carpenters and brick masons and things of that nature, and they're not around home, not taking care of their family, not having that tight-knit community that they really wanted. And after a while, they begin to get discouraged about that as well. They're isolated and homesick. Any of you homesick? You ever been homesick? Talked to a student last semester. A student came in my office and had her in one class, and she started crying. And about a half a box of Kleenex later, I got her to quit. And I finally said, you know, what in the world's wrong? It's a little bit more diplomatic. I tried to be nice. But I'm my dad or son, you know. And she said, I just want to go home. And she said, I know you're going to think that's silly because I'm a grown-up, but I need to be out on my own. And I told her, I said, listen to me. I said, if you enjoy your family and your home that much, you need to be thankful that you've got that. They began to get homesick because this is just a small little chunk, 11 families that were connected through 3 different states. And they wanted to go back to Independence, Iowa, where everybody was. The in-laws and the outlaws, everybody was there. And you could understand that. So that home community had a tendency to pull back. And they worried about what's going to happen to their kids. If you have a daughter who's of marrying age, and all you have are brothers and cousins, she is up the creek without the proverbial paddle. And how are you going to continue that community if you can't marry and propagate? And this, I think, is probably the biggest reason they would ultimately go back. Now, let's kind of wrap things up talking about Bologna's experiment by university. We begin to notice, there were like 19 kids born there in the period of time that they were there. But the last year that they were there was only one child born, and that child died. A little baby by the name of Mary Hockstetter. By the way, she is the only Amish person buried in the city cemetery out there in Columbia. So she left her legacy in that cemetery. But they began to look at that, and how are we going to continue if we can't marry and have families? The land didn't pan out. The real estate company lied to you. Productive farmland. Grow anything you wanted to grow. They didn't say you have to bring fertilizer for years and years and years and years and years after that to make it do something, and they didn't have time to do all of that. They had no outside support. We all have support networks. Man, I've got a small group that is second to none. And if something happens, we're nosy. I was going into work this morning, and I noticed that one of the guys in my small group, his car is in his driveway. Now, he's supposed to be at Little Rock Air Force Base. So, picked up the phone and called him. I said, everything okay? Oh, yeah, I just took the truck in today. I said, well, don't do that anymore. Hide the car if you're going to do that, because it bothers me. It's supposed to be gone. And when my kid was in the hospital just last week and had surgery there, they came by and had meals for us. And I had said something Sunday night, that I'm going to have to take this car, and my wife had driven it. Sucker's out of gas, so they took it and filled it up. And I was really thrilled about that. I really enjoy it more when gas is $4 a gallon and they fill it up. But even if it's $1.50, it was okay. They take care of that. But can you imagine being this small, little, isolated group? And you have nobody to talk to. You're on your own. Few marriage opportunities, we mentioned that. Illnesses and accidents. The last 2 years that they were in Bologna, man, I've got 30 seconds. I'm going to wrap it up, okay? The last 2 years that they were in Bologna, they spent a lot of time in Little Rock hospitals because they had some serious accidents, serious injuries. They're farmers. And they only would go to the hospital, source of last resort. They birth babies at home. We even have an example of one of these guys getting his hand smashed, and he lost 2 fingers, but they took care of that surgery at home on the kitchen table. I don't think so. No, knocked me out, But then, they thought hope springs eternal. Because they left, they all went back to Independence, Iowa, living a good and happy life, and then one of those families comes back. And they settle in McRae, about 40 miles away from Bologna, and they try to do it all over again. But as I shared with you, scam destroyed that particular community. This is the part that my students really like. Did I do okay? Let me thank you for allowing me to be here today. I had a ball. I enjoyed it. Got to renew a few old acquaintances. got the looks of evil from people that I work with. You know, it's just wonderful. I'm kidding about that, guys. It was just wonderful. And thank you, Rick, for letting me do this. I appreciate it.
And I'm sure Dr. Bender will be here for a few minutes. If any of you have questions, you can come up and talk to him afterward. And Dr. Bender, what we do for our speakers here is our club adopts a project each year. And our project this year is the Newspapers and Education Program through the Log Cabin Democrat. So we'll be providing 50 newspapers in your honor to local classrooms to use in their curriculum. Okay, it is CBC Day, so on your tables you've got homecoming schedules. Homecoming is tomorrow and Saturday. You have a card about the Cardinals game. If you've missed all the media, the Central Baptist College Mustangs will be the first team in Arkansas to play in Busch Stadium. Ticket information's on the back. $15 tickets for the Cardinals-Pirates game and the CBC game. And then there's some promotional items on the table you're free to take, and then we're going to draw for a door prize.